Hi everyone, welcome to Couchbase Coding with Matthew Groves. This is a 10-minute slice of my day as a developer advocate, live on Twitch every day at Matthew D. Groves. Check out old episodes up on YouTube there. Send me questions, comments on Twitter or email, also up there. Yesterday I went over the first bullet point of my mission statement. Why am I doing this streaming? Second bullet point today is to help me practice my speaking skills. Specifically, I do still say and so a lot. Even to this day, I've been speaking for years and years now, and it's still a frustrating tick of mine. So if I just did it again. If I do this every day, maybe I will get sick of hearing myself say and eventually stop doing so. All right, with coding, today I'm going to show you some cool stuff in Couchbase Server 5.5, which has just come out for Nickel. I want to talk about the hash join a little bit. So I wrote a blog post on this earlier, and I just did another another one. Blog post on hash join. So, oh my goodness, now I can't help myself. Joins. So Couchbase joins. Before 5.5, you could do a join, but it was only a key-based join. You had to use the keyword on keys. If I can scroll up here and find it somewhere. Yes, right here, on keys. Now, with the ANSI joins, you can join any field to any other field in documents. One other thing we've added besides that is the idea of a hash join. Now, relational databases also do hash joins. They usually do them behind the scenes. Currently, with Couchbase, you have to explicitly specify if you want to use a hash join. And the way you do that is you have this syntax here, and I'll get a better view of it here, where you can say inner join bucket on field equals field, but you put this use hash build or use hash probe in there, and then that will attempt to use a hash join. And you can see the results here. This query is just going to try to find all the landmarks that have the same email address as a hotel. And there happens to be two results in here, the Sportsman Inn and the Corner House Hotel, which I thought was pretty cool that it found that for me. One thing is that if you're not careful, you might miss this. The hash join is currently only available in Enterprise Edition. It's probably not going to make it to the Community Edition of Couchbase Server, which is fine because there's another type of join, the nested loop join, that it will fall back to if hash join is not there. So this got me thinking, if I'm a new developer trying out Couchbase Community, maybe I missed that part of the documentation. I'm guilty of this all the time, skimming past something and trying to use it anyway, even though it's not in the Community Edition. So what I did was I got a Community Edition build of 5.5. This binary is not yet released, so I can't give you a copy of this binary. However, it's totally open source, so you could hypothetically build your own Couchbase Community Edition 5.5 build. And of course, this is not the final product yet either. It's still in beta. So a lot may change between now and when the Community Edition actually gets released, which is typically one release behind the Enterprise release. But anyway, I thought I would get some feedback in as soon as I can to see what we can do when this happens. So I've got that same exact query from my blog post, but I'm putting it here in the Community Edition with the use hash build. If I go ahead and execute this, I want to hit the JSON view. When I'm executing this, you can see it's still running. It's a slow running query. And if I go back over to my blog post, I'll show the results of it there. It took 200 some milliseconds to run, which I think is pretty good for this complex of a query on a single node, laptop machine. Pretty good. But over here, it is way past even a reasonable length of time for a query of this complexity. It's still running. The reason for this is that we don't have the hash on Community Edition. But if I didn't know that going in, I might be confused at this point and or frustrated. And I want to refer to, since I've got some time, refer to this book by Steve Krug called Don't Make Me Think. This is a great book on usability, specifically for web applications, but I think it applies to really anything that you want people to use. And there's a concept here which I'm glad was available in the Amazon preview because I couldn't find my actual copy of the book. I'm not sure where it is. But there's this thing called the Reservoir of Goodwill. And this is kind of how I imagine developers. As a developer advocate, I imagine them with this green bar next to them that it fills up when they have the goodwill, and things are going great, and okay, maybe one or two speed bumps, but everything's going fine. And then as those speed bumps happen, as problems occur, as confusing things happen, stuff goes unexplained, that bar depletes, and the reservoir of goodwill gets lower and lower, and eventually get very unhappy. Someone using Couchbase for the first time might decide to go ahead and just abandon it and say, well, this is frustrating, I'm not making any progress. Forget it, I'll go do something else. Or they might post some angry tweet, which frankly is not nearly as common as someone just silently giving up. I'd rather have the angry tweet, at least I can reach out to that person, than someone who's silently giving up and moving on. So I feel like this is something that could deplete that reservoir. How much it's going to deplete it, I don't know. Or how common the situation is, I don't know. But I can't imagine someone coming into Couchbase with a full green bar. As much as I'd like that to be the case, not every developer starts the day with a full green bar. So they might come in, halfway depleted, or even starting to get a little grumpy. Maybe the coffee was old coffee or something, and they're grouchy already. So I have to assume that they're kind of grouchy coming in. So that's how I picture you developers, as kind of a half full enthusiasm bar, goodwill bar, on the verge of grumpiness at all times. And so with that in mind, what I would like to see in this case is not just a spinning execute button and never really finishing, or maybe timing out eventually. What I would rather see is some message that says, hey, it looks like you're trying to use a hash build. We don't have hash builds in community, so that is what is going wrong here. At least point them in the right direction. It's very similar over here in the bucket insights. These are only available in the full bucket insights are only available in Enterprise Edition. So this little message appears here that says you need to have Enterprise Edition for the schema inferencing to come up. So I want something like that to happen similarly over here. That's what I'd like to see. So I made some little mock-ups here. If you try to do a query in Enterprise Edition and you make a typo in a name, like I did here with type, I had an extra E, it'll actually figure this out with that infer command. It'll figure it out and say, hey, you probably made a typo here. Even though this is a perfectly valid query and it will execute on its own, it looks like you might have made a typo. And if you hover over that little icon there, you'll see a little message that says, hey, we couldn't find a field type with 2 E's inferred in the bucket, so maybe something going wrong here. And so that maybe is something I like to see. Another thing is that if you do a full hash join, there's a screenshot of the Enterprise Edition. I didn't want to have to spend time switching back and forth. If you do the plan here with the hash build, you can see that this yellow box here, it may be hard to read on the screen, but it says hash join. So it's actually indicating that there's a hash join happening, which is what we want to happen. If I run that same query over here on Community Edition, I'll bring this up in Community Edition. I go to plan, see down here, and maybe hard to see, let me zoom in a little bit, it says nested loop join. So right now, if I'm looking at this query, I said I wanted to use a hash join, but it's actually using nested loop join. There's a disconnect here, something's going wrong. And so ideally, hopefully you'll go look at the documentation, but again, I'm thinking you're on the verge of being grumpy and just shutting the whole thing down. So I'd rather have some feedback right here in the UI. So my suggestion is, okay, if you're typing use hash in the query editor and you're in Community Edition, show that little warning icon. And when you hover over it, just say what's going on. Hash join is not in Community Edition. It's going to fall back to nested loop join, and which might prompt them to go and look up what that means, look at the documentation, find my blog post, etc. And then further, another idea, maybe an and or, would be show a warning icon on the plan here that says, hey, I know you wanted a hash join, but this is a nested loop join. So you may want to look into that, what's going on there. So to do this, to make the suggestion, I'm going to create a new ticket in Couchbase's Jira. And I don't have a lot of time to go over this, but it's issues.couchbase.com. It is open to the public. There's a few hoops you got to jump through to get an account right now, but we do encourage people to go there and enter issues they have and suggestions and features and things like that. So my title here, I've already filled it in. I want there to be a warning message. I've prioritized this as major. I don't expect that necessarily to make it as a major. The PMs and the actual product team, the engineering team, is going to go through and review these, and they will change their priority, make adjustments, and so on, which is totally fine. Nothing I put in as a ticket is completely binding. I have just as much control over what goes in the product as you as a developer outside of Couchbase does. I can just make suggestions, but I'm not a product manager. So here's some components. It's definitely UI involves the query. That's the next release. Nickel involves nickel, so I'm labeling that. I'm making a note of my operating system. It probably doesn't matter for this case, but I do want to note that this is build 2473 and it is community edition. That's important information. And the steps I like to put in my description. This is something that I've carried over from my previous job, was to write tickets like this. Have a summary, so just what's going on, the motivation for the ticket, repro steps. How would I actually reproduce what's happening? What's actually happening at the end of those repro steps, and then what I would expect to happen instead. What I would want to happen in this case, the suggestion. So I'm going to enter all those things we just talked about there. I'm also going to attach those files to this so that they can see exactly what I mean. Just a little quick mock-up that I did in MS Paint. And that's going to be it. I'll create this ticket, and that will be off to hopefully get reviewed by the PM and the team, and they will prioritize it and address it, ask more questions and follow up and such like that. So, thank you very much for joining me. Check out Couchbase. Check out the ANSI join stuff. It's very cool. Make sure to check out the blogs at blog.couchbase.com. And that's it for today. Thanks very much for watching.